Okay, so this webinar is actually going to be in English. So I'm going to start by letting you know that 2017 was an extremely competitive year for Fulbright Columbia applications. So we had about 540 applications for 86 scholarships. So this is about a 17% acceptance rate. So that is to let you know that, there are many people who had excellent applications, and just because of the pure quantity of applications, did not pass as a nominado. Also, this webinar will give you some tips on having an excellent application and what you can do if you want to apply for next year. However, with more than 500 applications, we're not able to give specific feedback to applicants. We just do not have the capacity to do that with more than 500 applications. So we appreciate your understanding about that. We understand it would be wonderful to be able to give specific feedback to individual applicants so that you could improve for next year. But with the quantity, it's just not possible. We don't have the capacity to do that. It also does name very specifically in the términos de referencia that Fulbright Columbia does not give individual feedback. We only give reference. But I do believe that this webinar is going to give you some good tips. Also, we're happy to speak with you individually if you have specific questions about your application in terms of, your idea for what you want to study, things like that. We can speak to you specifically, but we will not, for example, have your application carpeta and be able to give you, specific reasons that your application was not accepted. However, I do think that this webinar is very useful. It's short, and then I will take your questions. So the components of a great application. What we're going to talk about today are meeting the requirements and uploading all documents, academic excellence and experience in your field, clear objectives and projected impact in Columbia. That one's really important. I'm going to repeat it. Clear objectives and projected impact in Columbia, competitive TOEFL and GRE scores, and strong letters of recommendation. So first, it's super important to know that the revisión técnica is very strict. So you do need to meet every requirement and upload all of the documents, or you will not pass the revisión técnica. So the términos de referencia are very long, I know, but it's really important to read them extremely carefully more than one time. Read them through completely more than one time. So for example, applicants won't pass the revisión técnica if you don't have the minimum, for example, GPA, TOEFL score, etc. So even if your GPA is 3.99 and the minimum GPA is 4.0, you won't pass the revisión técnica if you don't meet the minimum GPA. Same thing for, for example, the TOEFL score. If the minimum's 80 and you have a 79, you won't pass the revisión técnica with that score. It's a very strict process. If you don't upload all of the required documents, you won't pass that revisión técnica. So for example, some kind of common documents that people didn't upload were but it was very clear in the términos de referencia that these are required documents, is certificado de ranking, your transcripts from all of your degree programs, so from your pregrado and your postgrado. So if you're missing one of those documents, you won't pass the revisión técnica. And for example, the certificado de ranking, some schools don't give that. However, in the términos de referencia, it said very specifically, if your school does not issue certificado de ranking, you need a letter from the school stating that they do not issue certificado de ranking. So having all the documents, Also, if you upload a document that's different than what's required, for example, the only accepted documents for English scores are TOEFL and IELTS academic. So if someone uploaded an English test that wasn't TOEFL or IELTS academic, they won't pass the revisión técnica. So that's the first step. You need to meet all the requirements and upload all the documents, and it is a very lengthy process. Then the next point is academic excellence and experience in your field. So you do need to meet the minimum GPA requirements, and also keep in mind demonstrating high grades in your field is something that the committees of selection looks at. And that's because you want to demonstrate that you are going to be successful in a master's or PhD program in the field. You want to demonstrate participation in groups or events related to your field. Also, research experience and publications that are relevant to your field are very helpful. While these things are not required for you to apply to the Fulbright Beca, you can see that with so many applications that these things are going to help you make your application stand out when it's such a competitive process. Now, this is something that is super important that I want to emphasize: clear objectives and projected impact. So this really gets at the heart of Fulbright and the mission of Fulbright, not just Fulbright Columbia, but Fulbright as, you know, a global organization. So you need to have clear objectives that are reflected in your essays and the rest of the application. So in your CV, letters of recommendation, for example. You need to have an organized essay structure and correct grammar. You need to show that the academic programs, the 3 programs that you suggest in the application, align with your research interests and goals. And you need to state a problem that you hope to solve via this particular academic program. So basically what you're trying to show is, when you return to Columbia, how are you going to use the new knowledge, the new skills, the new experiences that you gain through a master's or PhD? How are you going to use those when you come back to Columbia to help improve your country? So specifically, what industry, what community, what organization will benefit from you having completed this master's or PhD program? So sometimes this is known as the multiplier effect. So how will you getting a master's or PhD affect and help people in your country? And so that's really the mission of Fulbright, that, you know, it's intercultural and academic exchange. And the idea is that you're going to come back to Columbia and use your new knowledge and skills to improve your country. So that's a very, very important part of the application. And you should make that clear through your essays, through your CV, through your letters of recommendation. So my recommendation is to attend the Fulbright webinars on the essays and CV next year. We're going to start those probably around March of 2018. So if you follow us on Facebook or on social media, you'll know exactly when when we're posting these webinars. You can also look on our website. If you want to review those webinars from last year, you can go to our YouTube page, Fulbright Columbia, and there's all the webinars from the Convocatoria 2017. There's one specifically on essays and one specifically on the CV. We also often do in-person workshops on essays and CV, and these are super important parts of the process. Okay, next point is competitive TOEFL and GRE scores. So you obviously have to meet the minimum requirements for the application, but for example, there's no minimum GRE score to apply to the Fulbright scholarship. However, that doesn't mean that the selection committee is not going to take into consideration your GRE scores and favor applications that have higher GRE scores. And the reason for that is that you need to convince the application committee that you are going to be successful in graduate study in your field. So you should understand the expectations for your field of study. So like checks the university requirements of some of the universities that you're interested in applying to. And you need to show that your GRE scores, meet those requirements or are very close to those requirements. All of the nominados receive a voucher to retake the TOEFL and GRE so you can, boost up your score. But you need to show that that's realistic, that, you can achieve the score that the universities or your field are looking for in both TOEFL and GRE. A very, it depends on the university, but a very general we say for TOEFL, for a master's degree program, minimum 80. For a PhD, minimum 100. And that does depend on the program in the school, so you can look at specific university requirements, but as a general rule, for admission, for competitive schools, that's what we're looking at. And then for GRE, we're looking for 300 total, 150 in each section. That depends on the school, and sometimes there's higher requirements also, but in general, that's the scores for admission to be competitive. So I have a recommendation to take the TOEFL test if you're going to apply to the Fulbright Scholarship next year. Take TOEFL this year. And the reason is that if you don't have the minimum score, you're going to have an opportunity to retake it, because there are people who had very close to the minimum score, had the entire application in, but they didn't meet the minimum score and they didn't have enough time to retake the TOEFL test, so they don't pass that revisión técnica. So take TOEFL this year, and if you need the opportunity to take it again, you'll have it. The TOEFL ITP is a paper-based TOEFL that Fulbright Columbia administers. So if you're interested in this option, it's valid for applying to the Fulbright grant. It's not valid for applying to universities in the US, but it is for the Fulbright grant. It's much less expensive, so it's 186,000 pesos. So you can see on our website the schedule. We are going to be adding more dates for sure soon, but the schedule and some more information. We're also doing a webinar about the TOEFL ITP tomorrow at noon. So if you want to, you can go on our website and sign up for that. And then test prep books. So this is for the TOEFL ITP, the paper-based, the TOEFL IBT, the computer-based, as well as GRE. If you want to buy test prep books from Fulbright, you can do that. They send them directly to your house. Or if you're interested in renting them from the Fulbright library, you can come here and there's no charge. You need to leave a form of identification with us. Make sure to call first and confirm that we're here to be able to take your appointment. If you're outside of Bogota, many of the Colombos have test prep books at their libraries that you can rent. So I would suggest calling the Colombos if you're outside of Bogota, or buying the book for yourself. And then having strong letters of recommendation is an important part of the application process. So these letters of recommendation should demonstrate strengths, accomplishments, and ability to successfully complete graduate studies in the United States. They should not be written by a friend or relative, and they should not include personal details. So my recommendation, again, is to attend the Fulbright webinars on letters of recommendation that are going to start in about March. They're also on our YouTube page right now if you wanted to take a look at them ahead of time. And so those are the main basic points that I want to get across to you. The next call for applications will open in about February of 2018. I suggest following us on social media so that you know exactly when the portfolio and the convocatoria open. The requirements and benefits can change slightly each year. So I do want to let you know, if you attended the webinars this year and read the tours from this year, you definitely need to reread the tours and re-attend the webinars to make sure that all the information is the same, because they can change slightly from year to year. And you want to start early. to make sure that you have all of your application materials in on time. So I'm going to take questions that you might have from the questions tab. I'll read them out loud. And then if you have any other questions, you can email Consejería. Someone is asking about IT high-level scholarship. So I'm not really sure, Angela, what that means, if you want to explain it a little bit better. Okay, Angela, the mean TEEC scholarship. So like I said, we'll need to check in about February because the portfolio can change from year to year slightly. So we'll need to check in February if the mean TEEC scholarship is available. That does depend a lot on our aliados and what is possible from year to year. So we need to check in February. Hopefully the mean TEEC scholarship will be available. Yeah, so some people have the question like, how do I know if I passed that revisión técnica or I didn't pass that revisión académica? And unfortunately, we didn't have the capacity to, let you know exactly what documents or what part of the process you, were able to pass through. So really what you have to do is look at the requirements in the términos de referencia to look and see what you could have possibly been missing from the revisión técnica. And if you don't think you were missing anything, then it's possible that you just didn't make it through the revisión académica, which was, very competitive with more than 500 applications. Martha's asking if this is for people who are applying to Beca Estudiante Doctoral Colombiano. No, this is for graduate study applications. There will most likely be a retroalimentación webinar for Estudiante Doctoral Colombiano, but we have not selected those candidates yet. So it would be, in the future once we've selected the candidates for investigación y docencia. So you could stay tuned for that, Martha. Is age a factor in selection? No, David. I mean, there's no minimum age. And there are definitely, in general, a lot of people who apply are right out of, their master's degree, are young professionals, but that's definitely not a factor. And there are definitely people who are a little bit older and have been working for many years who, are nominados this year. So no, age is not a factor. So a competitive TOEFL score is, as I said, we recommend at least 80 for master's and 100 for PhD, or very close to that. So the specific breakdown of how many applications there were for master's and PhD, or for how many applications there were for the specific each scholarship, I actually don't have those statistics. So with so many applications, what's the first thing you look at? So the first step is the revisión técnica. And I will say that out of those applications, out of those 540, about a little bit more than 60% passed the revisión técnica. So there were many people who did not have the minimum requirements and didn't have their documents in. And then after that, I will say that, the things that I just named, so academic excellence, proyección de impacto, in Colombia. Letters of recommendation and test scores are what are taken into account. So questions about if there's going to be, for example, the Mintic Scholarship or the J. Williams Scholarship next year, we won't know that until February. The portfolio can change in terms of what scholarships are offered as well as the requirements slightly each year. How do you study the ranking position of people since each university is different? So in terms of ranking is one of the documents that you need to submit, but it's just one of the documents, one of the considerations, obviously along with your promedio de las notas and your essays, your research experience. There's like many things that come into play to look at the application as a whole. So it's just one of the factors, the ranking. Do you have any feedback on the interview phase? Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question, Margarita. So there is, if you look in the términos de referencia, there is a section about interviews and specifically what we're looking for in the interviews. So if you go on the website, you can download the términos de referencia. Every one of the becas has a section about interviews and what we're looking for. So I would definitely look at that. But I would say, you know, one of the most important things is that it's the same as the application in general. You need to confidently convince the committee that you are prepared for graduate study in your field, and you need to confidently convince them that you have very clear objectives about what you're going to study, why you're going to study it, and what you're going to do with that new information and skills when you come back to Colombia. Las recomendaciones son las básicas para pasar, pero sería bueno hablar de la parte de entre. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I just talked a little bit about entrevistas. If you have more specific questions, you can let me know. Yeah, a lot of people are asking about the interviews. ¿Cuál es el error más común en el personal statement? ¿Qué información es relevante? Yeah, I would say the error in the personal statement and los ensayos en general es cuando la gente no es específico. Necesita dar ejemplos muy específicos, puntuales, que demuestran por qué usted es preparado para estudiar una maestría o doctorado en los Estados Unidos y exactamente qué va a hacer cuando regrese a Colombia. Necesita ser como muy específico y puntual. Y por eso les digo para revisar el webinar de los ensayos y también usualmente tenemos talleres y asistir las talleres. Entonces, el error más común de verdad es poner su CV en la forma de un ensayo. Como yo hice eso, después hice eso, después hice eso. Eso es el error más común, sin detalles, sin personalidad. Okay, I want to study a master on visual development for games and animation. Is this a valid career for an art scholarship? So yeah, if you have specific questions like this, we really do need to look at the portfolio that's going to come out in February to be able to advise on this, because the requirements can change year to year. They do also depend on the aliado. And this year you can see, for example, we did have the Mincultura scholarship, and there were very specific areas that are listed. You could review them right now on the website, but those could also change in the future. So to give that specific advising, we need to wait for the portfolio that comes out in February. So the recommendation for 100 for a PhD program is to be admitted to competitive universities. So, I mean, there are plenty of people who had less than 100 who were awarded the Fulbright scholarship, but they had something close, something that looked like if they were going to retake the TOEFL, once they were nominado, that they could get close 100 or close to 100 in order to be admitted to universities for a PhD program, if that makes sense. So someone said they presented IELTS for the application period. That's totally valid. I don't suggest that if you already have IELTS that you need to go out and take TOEFL. No. I suggest, you know, you have to have the minimum in IELTS, which is 6.5, which is a high score. So no, IELTS is very acceptable for the application, and we don't look at TOEFL as a better or worse option. The next round will start in about February and close in either May or June. We do need to look very specifically at the dates for next year because they can change. So be pendiente in about February for the dates of the new convocatoria. What are the most common problems in the interview? So, I mean, I'm not involved in the interview processes as the consejera académica, but what I can say in general about the interview process is you need to be really confident and very clear about what your objectives are, how you're going to meet those objectives, and then what you're going to do when you come back to Colombia. So someone's asking if they want to apply again next year, can they use the same recommendation letters? So we will have to see what is the requirement for next year. Usually you cannot use the same recommendation letters, but we should wait in February and see what the requirement is. So yeah, again, we don't know if any specific becas will open next year. We need to wait and look when the convocatoria opens. So I will say that, you know, this scholarship was so competitive this year with more than 500 applications that if you know, are looking and you attended all the webinars, you believe you wrote a great essay, and, you know, you revised your CV and you had good letters of recommendation, it's very possible that there are very excellent qualified candidates that, you know, were not nominado, and it's just because of the sheer quantity of applications. That's very possible. Especially the scholarships that were for master's programs. There were so few scholarships for master's programs that those were extremely competitive this year. So also the question about the number of grants, if they'll remain the same for next year, will there be more, will there be less? We really have to wait until February to see about that. Es muy importante tener mucha experiencia previa para poder aplicar. ¿O hay algún factor con respecto a experiencia que ayude? Bueno, no hay un requisito, por ejemplo, de tener experiencia laboral o de publicaciones o algo así. Aunque puede ver con tanta gente que están aplicando, va a ayudarle si tiene experiencia en grupos de investigación, con publicaciones, en experiencia laboral, va a ayudar su aplicación, aunque no hay como un requisito mínimo de eso. So the minimum to apply to the different becas for TOEFL, for example, for Cosciencias was 80. What I'm telling you is what we're looking for to be admitted to competitive schools in the U.S. is 100. So you need to be able to show that you can improve your score to be able to be admitted into a PhD program. However, there were people who obviously had less than 100 who were nominados for the Ciencia Scholarship, and right now they're studying and retaking the TOEFL so that they can get a higher score. So the GRE exam is required for all programs except law, because law requires a different exam. We do need to see next year about the requirements for GRE. I would stay tuned for that if that's going to be is going to be a requirement or not. However, this year the requirement for GRE was for people who are going to study PhD programs. If you are studying master's programs, you did not need to take the GRE to apply to the Fulbright program this year. Next year, if you apply again, you do need to fill out a new application and upload your documents again. So it's a really important idea to save all of the documents, like your transcripts and everything like that, that you might have, so that you can re-upload them, because you can't use the same application that you had from last year. So it's not a requirement to be accepted at a university before you apply. Most people are not accepted at a university because they work with Fulbright, los nominados, to apply to 5 universities. So usually the process is apply to Fulbright first, then apply to the universities. For IELTS and TOEFL, are we looking for a minimum score in each part? That's not something that we have, clear recommendations on, other than the minimum score overall. ¿Es mejor tener recomendaciones académicos o mejor del trabajo? Mi recomendación es 1 de 1 para tener una aplicación como balanceado. So if you want to apply again, of course you can change your essays and improve your essay, your CV, change your recommenders. You can't actually use the same application from this year. Someone's saying that they heard that the Fulbright budget is going to be reduced this year or next year. That's something that we don't have the budget for next year. We're hoping that everything stays the same. Actually, the budget, the reason that some people are saying that is that the budget in the United States from the Department of State has not been confirmed yet. So we don't have any information about that right now, but we hope that everything stays the same. Yeah, and then some people are saying they also heard about Ciencias with budget cuts, so will that Becca be available next year? I mean, we hope so, but we really need to wait and answer those questions next year when the portfolio comes out. So the question is, if someone has 2 years of research experience, they're applying for a PhD instead of a master's, does that weigh differently, a master's or 2 years of research experience? So that's the requirement. So if you can show 2 years of research experience, you know, I would say good quality research experience, you have publications, you're part of a research group, then that weighs the same as a master's degree in terms of the application. So can you use the same essays? Of course you can use the same essays. However, I would definitely recommend attending the webinars and trying to improve your essays. I mean, you could always improve your essays and CVs. People who were not selected were informed by email. So there should have been an email that you received from the Programas team, the Programas email address, that informing people who were not selected. Is the requirement for the GRE for all master's programs? This year, no master's programs required the GRE if you're applying, except for the J. William Fulbright Scholarship. I think that's the confusion. J. William Fulbright Scholarship did require taking the GRE, which was for masters. The other scholarships that were for master's programs did not require the GRE this year. But we do need to check for the requirement in February. Can you use the same recommendation letters as well? As I said, usually you cannot use the same recommendation letters. I mean, your recommender could save the letter and change the date and upload it newly. We do need to check on that for next year if you will be able to use the same recommendation letters or not. Usually the case is that you cannot use the same recommendation letter. You know, it needs to at least have this new date on it, and your recommender needs to upload it again. That's the normal case. The interviews. So I believe I already gave my, my feedback about the interviews. I'll say one more time in terms of the interviews. You need to very confidently express why you are prepared and qualified to do graduate study in your area. And you need to be extremely clear and confident about your objectives for graduate study and what you're going to do with your new skills and experiences when you come back to Columbia. What population or organization or institution are you going to help and improve when you come back to Columbia? So that's my suggestion for the interviews. So the GRE is required for the J. William Fulbright Scholarship. At least it was this year. We need to check for next year about the requirements because it's one of the most competitive scholarships. So the GPA is one of the highest. It has the requirement for GRE. So because it's one of the most competitive and most selective scholarships, they do require the GRE. They did this year. They might. You need to check in February about the requirements. Can you have the same recommender but not the same letter? So I mean, your recommender could upload into the system again the same letter but with a new date on it. It's fine if the letter looks the same. That's not going to be a problem. Okay, so I'm going to stay on for just a few more minutes. If there's some specific, very specific questions, I'm going to try to write the answers to them. I was trying to answer the more general questions out loud, so if you're still on the webinar, I'm going to answer some specific questions written, and thank you very much for attending.